to
WLT Book Buzz. I'm Bunmi.
And I'm Lauda, and we're both former interns of WLT and self-professed book lovers.
We currently work in children's publishing, and we love to travel in our free time. So doing this show allows us to exemplify and uplift diverse voices in literature and bring together two of our great loves.
Because you can always travel in the span of a book, and you can always experience new cultures and backgrounds and peoples, well, from the comfort of your own couch or home.
Exactly. So, I mean, I like to go in person too, but when I can't, why not?
If you are available to travel, great. If not, you can bring the traveling to you by reading books set in other countries or other places.
Exactly.
So, each episode we highlight a diverse range of books, by BIPOC authors and illustrators. And the theme for this episode is Latinx.
Whoop, whoop, whoop.
Yay!
Fun story is that Lara and I actually spent some time this summer or last year, I guess it's been some time, in the DR and had a lot of fun just immersing ourselves in Latinx culture and Latin culture in general. So it's fun to kind of visit books. I kind of still have a hangover from that trip. So I kind of I just need to keep on reading books that are set in Latin countries so I can continue to get more and more of the culture that we enjoyed while we were there.
I know. And it was so funny because we don't live near each other normally, but I just so happened to be like, hey, let's work from home in our Dominican Republic home. And Bunmi was like, yeah.
Yep. So it was home for a great time. It was great.
it was truly great. And you will see some Dominican books on the list. So you can travel there through a book.
Indeed.
You can also travel there, not a book.
Yeah, I mean, clear. You should at some point go for real, but in the book is a great way to do it too. Because we're kind of taking a really broad span, we decided, to kind of go by themes, and so that way we can kind of touch on a lot of different topics that are important within Latinx culture and also just important in just life in general. And so we have a few different themes for you. And the first one is growing up, just like family and, all that good jazz. And so I would love for you to kick it off, Laura, with some of your favorites in that category.
Yeah. So I'm Mexican American. My dad immigrated from Mexico. I don't speak Spanish, which is a huge point of contention for myself. But I will say that, reading a bunch of books and culling through my list and being like, okay, what were aspects of my heritage and my culture that I see represented in literature? And then also seeing nuances from other, Spanish speaking countries or that sort of thing was really kind of cool to see this amassed list. But we'll say that I have one YA recommendation that I read. Oh, sorry, I have two YA recommendations I cannot read despite reading books all the time. But Furia, which is set in Argentina, which I want.
Where we wanted to go. And COVID, but Argentina, yes, I love that book. Furia is great.
It's so good. It's about a girl who's trying to figure out her dreams and what is putting her in place, but also not giving up on her heritage and her background and what she wants to do, playing football, which is not predominantly something that women do as much. And then also kind of along the lines of her family has certain expectations for what they think she should do. And she has her own dreams and she's like, I want to pursue this.
And let's be clear that we mean football as in soccer and not football like American football, just to be clear.
It's set in Argentina. But it was so good. And I think along the lines similarly is With the Fire on High, which is another fantastic book about a woman who is, goes on a study abroad trip and she's learning how to cook and she's, figuring out what she wants to do with life, but then kind of also re-examining her place in the world, a little bit of romance, which is also in Furia too.
Yep.
And a little bit of cooking and a lot of love in my heart for both of these books, if I'm going to be cheesy.
Yeah, and what I loved about With the Fire on High also is an Afro-Latinidad story, and I feel oftentimes when we think of Latin culture, we forget about the Afro-Latinidad section and the fact that there was a lot of mixing from both indigenous people and European people and enslaved people that all just kind of is part of Latin culture now. And so I also love getting that representation in that book.
Yeah, and there's a ton of stuff out there.
I have a YA that I just read recently, and it might even be really honestly adult, but I feel like it was YA because it was all set in the young adult span and the characters are young adult, and it's called The Queen of Water. And what's so interesting about this is it's actually about a indigenous person growing up in Ecuador, and just kind of like her place in the 80s, and that was a time when, like, for the most part, indigenous people were still kind of kept down, and they were not like that culture was like let down, and so you had this people who were more Spanish and lighter skinned kind of getting to have a say, and so she speaks Quechua, and it's coming from that family, but then it gets an opportunity, but basically is sold as like a slave in a sense to a mestizo family, a more white family, passing family, and just kind of her journey to like reclaim her own identity, her own sense of self, but also even her culture, and figure out, like, should I be ashamed that I am indigenous, or should I actually embrace that? And so it's just a beautiful story. It's actually based off a real life story as well too. It's fictional because, like, obviously I have to like fill in the blanks, but Maria is one of the authors, and it's actually her story.
Mm.
And then another YA is actually written by Maria from Sesame Street, whose real name is Sonia Manzano, but like I just think of her as Maria. And it's called The Revolution of Evelyn Serrano. And it talks a lot about just kind of like Puerto Rican culture in New York City, especially when, like, there's a lot of the immigrant communities were starting to like thrive, but then they were not getting treated well. And so they started like basically this revolution to fight for their rights within America. And so that kind of like, touches on that point where, again, this girl's trying to figure out, like, as a Puerto Rican, what is my identity? Why does it matter to me? And am I American? Am I Puerto Rican? Which one's really my identity? And like, what does it mean to speak up for myself and to really fight for what's needed? And like, there's some family dynamics there as well too.
When you were talking about that, I realized that I do have another YA recommendation, which is kind of along the lines of like, how do you kind of like reorient yourself in the sense of you're like, the book I'm meaning to talk about is Ophelia After All, which is about a Cuban American teenager, going to high school, kind of figuring out herself, but figuring out like her culture and her background, but then, how she fits into like high school and like queer identity and friendship dramatics, or friendship is dramatic when you're in high school. I'm not gonna lie, it's probably still dramatic as an adult, but in high school, everything seems so close to home. But I do think that it was like a really beautiful story of a girl searching for herself and kind of being like, where do I fit in, and how do aspects of my heritage tie into who I am as a person? And then of course, middle grade, which is so good. And I will say that I just read The Last Cuentista, which won the Newbery this year.
On my list. It's on my list.
The cover is gorgeous. I straight up had a lot of cover envy looking at it because I was like, oh wow, I didn't realize it was a middle grade, just based on the cover. But it's set in the future, and it follows a girl who's put in the space pod, and she wants to be a storyteller. She wants to like bring her heritage to this new world that we're going to because we've destroyed planet Earth. And it, the story has definitely a twist in the sense that something happens, and the ship that she's on has a chance to remake itself while she's put into like this sleep stasis, and she wakes up with her memories, but everyone else's memories of everything on Earth has been taken away, and so she's kind of like the last storyteller, and like,
wow,
that's like what I'll like spin
that
off
sounds
with.
so good. Like, I mean, the cover, like you said, is beautiful, and I've been intrigued by it. But I also thought it was also YA because of the way the cover was designed. And so, and I love YA, don't get me wrong, but middle grade's my real love. And so I was like, oh, I'll read it eventually. But now it just got bumped up my list a little bit higher because it's middle grade.
And it's like, I mean, like anyone can read it and find something amazing about it, but it just really looks on the sense of, like how powerful storytelling is, and like being able to know where you came from and how that shapes your future. Chef's kiss. Chef's
That is
kiss.
so deep, just even that explanation, that I'm like, I'm going to sit with that.
Yeah. And then I also read Loteria.
Oh, love it. Sorry. That was more of joy than anything else.
Oh, I'm so glad that we both had the same reaction, and I loved that it touched on like that small element of like magical realism. And again, like a girl who was kind of like going through life and being like, what is like happening, or playing this card game, which to be fair I had never heard of despite it being Mexican American.
What? Which is so funny because, like, okay, obviously I'm not Mexican American, but I did grow up in Texas, which is obviously a border state to Mexico, and I taught for many years, and a lot of my students were Mexican or Mexican Americans, depending on just their family stories. And it was so funny that, like, Loteria was, they're like, we were like, do you want to do bingo? They're like, what about Loteria? And we're like, sure. And it's like a bunch of white teachers and me being like, we're gonna play Loteria. We don't know how to do this. But like I was introduced to it because of my students. I heard about it, but I actually did not understand the dynamics of the game until I was like reading this book. And it was so cool to understand how the game, and I just love how the author wove the game with also a storytelling of, like, like you said, magical realism and this family and this like fierce love for a girl and her cousin, like that sibling, which they're almost like brother and sister. So that fierce love of family. So beautiful. And the illustrations are darling too.
Truly though.
Yeah, such a beautiful. I do have one picture book that I would love to add in the growing up section, which I will say it's a little bit of a quirky story, but it's called Gustavo the Shy Ghost, which I know like is like, well, how does this have to do with like growing up? But it's about this little ghost who's super shy, that he like disappears a lot, and so no one notices him. Like, and so he really wants to make friends, but he's a shy ghost, so he's disappearing and no one and so it's also just about, like, again, I think it's a beautiful book for kids who are shy or who are struggling to make new friends. It shows them how to do that, and it shows how ultimately, like, it's okay to be just exactly who you are. And as tying it to Latinx culture, the author is also the illustrator, and like just so cool how she like really incorporated just so much of the Day of the Dead culture within the art. Is just everywhere. And it was beautiful, but it was also, you just see like how much her Latin culture influenced the storytelling and the art, and obviously his name Gustavo, and like, it was just darling little cute picture book.
No, I love that. Our next theme of categorizing books is food, which
yum yum.
There was definitely some of the books on this list, I would be reading them and I'd be like, wow, I really am hungry right now. And I think that one of my favorite books that I read a couple of years ago was A Cuban Girl's Guide to Tea and Tomorrow.
That sounds too cute.
It is very cute. It's about a Cuban American girl, and she goes to England of all places, to kind of like live with, I think it's a sister, but just kind of like honing in on her cooking skills and meeting people there, and then just kind of like figuring out where she is and what she wants to do with her life, which kind of ties into the growing up category.
Yeah.
But the food descriptions in this book were so next level that I would be sitting there being like, I wish I had like this food in front of me, and I didn't. So it's a beautifully cute story. The romance is like so slow burn and sweet. I love this book, and I do get hungry when I think about it. So
adding it to my list immediately.
And then I have a couple picture book recommendations specifically about food as well. May Your Life Be Deliciosa, which has beautiful illustrations, and it's all about making tamales with your family, which I also did a little bit. Like mostly I would try to make them tamales, and my abuelita, she would kind of laugh at me because she's like, yeah, a little bit misshapen, but they still tasted good. So
that's all that matters. I read this one. What I loved about it also is how they like every single action of making the tamale was also a blessing, and like a way of passing down like something of meaning. So like the flour, the this or the that, and the mashing and the mixing all meant something to be like, may this be spicy, may this be sweet, may this be, and then of course, may your life be deliciosa at the end, right? And I was like, oh, like how cute is this? Because food is so good in your stomach, but it also like, it was also food for the soul, right? And like these words were a sense of like also building up the reader to like be a blessing in their life in a way too, which I just love so much. And it also made me really want to do tamales, which again, thinking about my students, that was one of my favorite things. I kind of miss teaching because the mamas would bring me tamales regularly. And I was like, yeah, and especially during Christmas, because they're like, oh, here you go. We're like, and I'm like, oh man, it's been a while since I've had a really great, good home cooked tamale.
I know, like that's the bad thing about reading these books is you automatically get hungry, but I also would be remiss if I did not recommend A Song of Frutas, which it was such a beautiful book, highlighting this aspect of popsicles and, Cuban American food. And I kind of got hungry while reading it. And then I also would say Vamos, Let's Go Eat was beautifully illustrated. The food in it was like punchy and poppy and like right in your face. And the illustrations were so good.
Yeah, I've not read this one, but I read Vamos, Let's Cross the Bridge, and there is some food in that one, but like I agree that the illustrations are always so much fun. And I also love how there's Spanish words throughout, like everything is labeled in the book, but also even in the dialogue, there's some Spanish. So you also start like getting like used to the idea of this is it, this is us.
Yeah.
Not and there's no like changing it or writing it for the white gaze. It very much was like, no, this is our culture, this is who we are, and we're just like throwing it all out there. And I love that so much. I think a lot of times like you'll see cultures try to tamper down their parts of themselves in order to impress the Western culture or the Western eye. And I just love that like none of these books really do that, but I definitely saw that here, especially as like you see all the Spanish words everywhere, and it just was like really cool to see. A book that I thought about as a middle grade is called All You Need Is Love, which that is a pun because it's a book about a girl who is helping in a bakery in Spain, which I had moments where I was like, does Spain count as Latinx? But I was like, it is a Latin culture. And then like there was the immigration from Spain to lead to a lot of our Latin culture on this side of the world. And so I think it does count, and it's and the author definitely is considers herself Latin. And I mean, basically, it's about a girl whose mom sends her to go live with her grandmother for the summer, and part of it is because actually her family situation is rough, and the mom's trying to get her out of the picture so that she can figure out her own mess, and she feels kind of neglected and angry, but soon like interacts with and meets her mom's childhood best friend who happened to grow up to become a baker. And so he teaches her how to make bread. And I have never been interested in making bread before. Even during COVID, when everybody else was making bread, I could care less. But after reading this book, I was kind of like, maybe I do want to go knead some bread. Like maybe I do. And like, ooh, what's that pastry you're making there? And what's that? And like, it was just so beautiful. And like, and they, again, weave in culture about Spanish culture and just kind of like, why does this food matter? And I do think that like, from what I can tell from what I read, like every book I've read that has anything with like food is a part of it, because food is a huge part of just the way that people show love and that people gather together and take care of each other, and also just like be a community. And so I just loved seeing that in this book as well too.
Yeah. So if you're not hungry by now, we can move into our next topic, which is a little bit more serious, but food is also very serious and we take that quite seriously. But we have a grouping for immigration, and Anita and the Dragons was a book about a family that moves from the Dominican Republic to the US. And like the dragon signifies the airplane that she takes because she's so young and she doesn't really understand like what's happening, and she has to leave her grandmother. But it was just beautiful story. I kind of got teary-eyed by the end, and also it just hit a little bit closer because we had spent a month in the Dominican Republic, and the idea of like picking up and moving to go to another place in the hopes that you want a better future for your family, it just like hit closer to home. And then Hear My Voice, Testimonies of Children Detained at the Southern Border of the United States. This was a very interesting book. It had like a bunch of contributors, like each page and illustration was a different person illustrating. And so it didn't feel at all disjointed because each person had their own specific style, but they were kind of illustrating, I think, specific notes children had written about being detained and like what it was like being in that holding period. It was very heavy, but done in such a way that I was like, wow, I wish everyone could read this book, even to just like get a glimpse of what it's like.
That one out. Yeah, I'm gonna have to check that. That sounds really powerful for sure.
I mean, it was very hard, but I definitely think that like people need to hear this kind of story. And then my last picture book is Between Us and Abuela, and another Mexican American story, and about what it's like visiting families who don't live in the same country, but you kind of like are going through that back and forth narrative. And it was good.
When I thought about immigration, you know, again, someone who grew up in Texas, that was a huge part of what we talked about a lot. And, you know, and I've actually like been to El Paso and got to walk across the border before to Juarez. And so I was thinking about some of the books that I was thinking about were, one was also two picture books. One is My Two Border Towns, which is newer by, and like, it is about a boy who feels out like he lives on one side, but he and his father regularly cross to the other side to visit their family and to do their shopping and to check in on people. And they cross back. And on his way back, like he sees all the people who are waiting their turn and just hoping to get a chance to get across the border. And you know, living underneath the bridge or living above the bridge, and the friendships he's even developed with those people because it's been year after year after year or months after months that he's seen them there. And you can tell that his own confusion about like, wait, we can come and go freely, and like, and also our families on both sides, so what does this border really mean? And like, and it's so arbitrary to a child, and while we as a government have made it this like, you know, different thing. And then another one is Mango Moon, and that one actually also explores deportation. And so a little girl and that experience of her family member, and then just thinking that the moon is the thing that connects them, even though that she does not know where her I think it's her father, if I remember correctly, is at the moment. And it definitely is done so gently, but also like, you know, definitely is a real part of someone's lives. And I know a lot of times we think that like, man, that's so intense to talk about with the kid, but I always say like, if they're young enough to experience it, others are young enough to like, you know, learn about it and hear about it and build empathy for their fellow, you know, friends and classmates and, you know, peers in life. And these are kids' real experiences. And so, and I think that these authors handle it in ways that are gentle enough that you can start the conversation with the child, but not necessarily have to worry about all the nuances that would go over their head. And then you were talking about the DR earlier. And so I, you know, was reading Before We Were Free by Julia Alvarez, who is kind of like a DR legend, you know, writer, but this one is one of her YA ones. And or middle grade, actually, I guess. I don't even know what age you would say this is. I know that my seventh graders have read it in English, but I also feel like it does, there's some intense things that happen that would make it just also a little bit hard for a young kid. But it's during, you know, the dictatorship that's happening in the DR, and her family is part of kind of the revolution to get rid of this dictatorship and the danger it puts them in. That eventually leads to like some of her family slowly immigrating to the US to escape potential like imprisonment and other things. And then, you know, and her dealing with that confusion. And then also whenever it's potentially her turn to immigrate, what does that mean for her?
Yeah.
And on a similar note, also YA, not YA, sorry, middle grade is The Barefoot Dreams of Petra Luna, which is set actually during the Mexican Civil War and Revolution. So more revolution, not Civil War, the Mexican Revolution. And so this is like quite a while ago. And it's based off of the author's actually grandmother's story of her being like 9, 10, and remembering having to walk to the US border and try to get across, and just kind of how that worked. And so it was, what was interesting to me is to see that border issues were still an issue in the early 1900s as it is now in the 2000s, mid 2000s. So it was like fascinating to just kind of see how like things, how much have changed, how much little has changed, to like go back that far in time. And then I just want to list out a classic that people probably have read, but again, like sometimes you may have not read it. I know I did not read it until a few years ago, but it's Esperanza Rising by Pam Munoz-Ryan, and like beautiful book. But like talking again like about that, it's historical, where it's also talking about like a lot of the immigrants who came to California were working on a lot of those farms and citrus and all sorts of stuff, and just kind of their experiences. And again, that just struggle of what it is like to be an immigrant, to leave your entire home. Because in the story, like Esperanza was rich, her family was a rich Mexican family, and suddenly they are like thrown into absolute poverty and despair as they choose to flee for a lot of chaos to come to America. And then they're treated as second class citizens, you know, and what does that really look like? And so just beautiful stories that I think humanize not only the immigrant experience, but also just opens your eyes if you've never gone through it or you don't really understand it, to just really think about like the humanity aspect of it, and not just kind of the like policy aspect of it.
No. And I mean, like, there's definitely, you know, like moments of beauty and moments of, you know, struggle in all of these stories. And I think that like not shying away from some of the things that people go through is like important. And then, you know, to not segue super well, but like here we go. Our last theme were beautiful illustrations, because there were so many books that like kind of played off of like someone's cultural background, or, you know, like nuances of their heritage, or just like books that were plain beautiful. And we just wanted to highlight some of them. I can go first and say Bright Star. Oh my goodness, the illustrations are, like it's set in like a desert, and there's a lot of these desert creatures, and it's like this very like beautiful, like poetic, kind of like portrayal of like who you are and like what you can be. And then at the end, you find out that it's based on, like some like immigration and like kind of, like a little bit of like stigmatization that they're portraying in such a beautiful way that the message is not like pounded over your head, but at the end you're like, I get it.
I love books like that.
Truly, it's gorgeous. And then I love Salsa Lullaby.
That's so cute.
It's literally, it's so cute. It's like this just beautiful family that is just like singing a song. You can sing along too. I don't know if there's actual song, but it's written beautifully. But it's just this family, and they're just dancing around because they're just happy to be with each other and singing. And I just get so much joy when I read it. And then my last one is Latinitas. And it was, it's kind of like this infographic kind of style book, in the sense of like each page has kind of like an illustration of this a Latinita from history. And then, like it's very inspirational, and it like has this beautiful, like very like nuanced kind of like art style. And I felt like I learned a lot, and there was a bunch of women that I had not heard of before.
Awesome. Well, I obviously chose two picture books too, because that's where beautiful illustrations are mostly seen. And one of the ones I want to talk about is actually one that comes from Brazil, and it was translated in the US, and it's called Along the Tapa House, which I might not be saying exactly right, but it's a river in Brazil that actually has a river community. And every year, this small community that has these like beautiful houses on stilts or whatever have to actually like get on their boats and pack up their entire house and like move to higher ground, because like the waters will rise and their houses would be underwater. And at the end of the season, they get to get back on the boats and return back to their house and put everything back in. It's like, this is what they normally do. And so the story itself is like, is about siblings who realize they left something behind. So they have to go back and get it before it's too late. But the illustrations are really fun because they immerse you in the space. And they just really, and you can see just kind of the style is very also, again, like attached to Brazilian culture, and it just brings to life this village community in a way that's not cartoony or kitschy. It's just like very gorgeous on a lot of levels. And then I also just love Where Are You From? And this is by Shamile Mendez, who actually wrote Furia as well too, but she writes picture books. And this one, the illustrations are done by Jamie Kim, but like it's I think it's a grandfather and a granddaughter, and just asking like the question of where are you from, talking about going back a little bit to immigration, right? Talking about where are you from, and she's like, what do you mean where I'm from? Like, I grew up here, I was born here, I don't know, like I don't. And the grandpa's like, well, you come from a lot of different places. And so he takes her through like their cultural history, their ethnic history, their, and you come from the desert and the people, like, all these things like that, right? And it's just like, and each of the illustrations where they bring to life describing the places she comes from to say like, this is who you are. And so when someone asks you where you come from, like you come from a lot, and it's a lot of like beauty and greatness, like that I think is just shines through. And the way that the drawings are done are very, very cute, but they also like bring to life these like aspects of who this character is and who their culture is. It's just really gorgeous. And it's really, it would have been hard to illustrate in my brain, but I feel like it was like they nailed it, like absolutely nailed how to like bring this to life.
Yeah, no, I love that. So, I mean, this is just a very short list of books that fall underneath the Latinx umbrella. There's tons you could read, and
tons more.
It's always hard to narrow down, but we also want to quickly highlight the NSK finalist, New Stat finalist, and that is Meg Medina.
Who is amazing.
Yeah, and she's written a lot of stuff. I know that Mercy Suarez Changed Gears was a John Newbery Medal winner, and Bunmi and I both read it, and it was excellent. And then she has a bunch of other books. I don't know, Bunmi, if you have any other insight.
Yeah, I mean, she writes picture books, and middle grade is primarily where she comes from. And if I remember correctly, she also used to write a bunch of, she does write some young adult as well too. But yeah, she just writes a range, and all of her books really do capture the culture and the sense of what it means to be Latina for her. And
Yeah.
that's what I think is just always the best part of her writing, is that like she does not shy away from being very true and authentic to who she is and who her culture is, and her characters, you know, embody that. And so when I think about like, you know, Mercy Suarez, like you have this family that like live in a row of houses, you know, the three houses, and it's like her aunts, and like, and like that sense of like this community, because like Latinx culture is very community based. So they all chose to buy this house. So they could be like, all, I mean, these three houses next door to each other, so they could all be together, right? And how in her mind it's embarrassing when she compares it to her like white friends, but then, you know, realize like, but I also, this is the best part of my life. Like I could just go next door, my grandparents right there. I can go right next door, my cousins are right there. Like this is great. And there's a sequel as well, which just came out. And but like, you know, like Mango Abuela and Me is a picture book that was a Pura Bell Pay Award winner, and honor book rather. And that one's about like a girl and her abuela and their like parrot named Mango, and just like the parroting that happens there. And it's a little bit of a silly story, but also a very sweet story that just kind of like this connection between, again, like family and that idea of familia. And so, I mean, she just has a lot of great stories. And again, like I think that culture is always at the heart of what she does. And she's really also passionate about just making sure that like diversity is highlighted for all voices. And so she's on the National Board of Advisors for SCBWI, which is you know, does all this kids book stuff, and then also on the advisory board for We Need Diverse Books, which has been pushing diversity in literature for a long time. So she is wonderful, and if you've not read something of hers, please do.
And I think that like there's something to be said for someone who is able to just like expertly weave their culture into the very backdrop of a story, in the sense of like, you know, not necessarily going overboard to explain like, oh, this is, you know, like my abuelita, you know, who like feeds me tamales, which is, you know, like a corn masa filled with meat, you know, like she just like presents it out there.
Exactly.
And I think that there's something beautiful for like sharing essences of your heritage and your background, but like also not explaining it. Like people don't necessarily always need for you to explain like their background, but you can just like slowly become immersed in their world and their viewpoint. So I think that it's beautiful how expertly she just does it.
Yeah.
But that is our episode. We have, you know, we'll have all of our books listed in the description link, you know, and we are always looking for new recommendations. You know, we love reading from across like all around the world and being able to experience different people's backgrounds and foods and cultures and, you know, issues. So hit us up if you ever have a rec.
And please check out WLT at worldliteratoday.org, as they are clearly the ones who are letting us do this fun thing with you guys all the time. And so we're going to leave you some parting words of inspiration now.
Yeah, from Emily Dickinson: to travel far, there's no better ship than a book.
And from Philip Heery: that's the thing about books that lets you travel without moving your feet. See you next time, and happy
Bye. Happy reading.